Tomorrow walked into my office yesterday, not as a visitor, but as a blueprint already drawn, already complete, waiting only for recognition. The architect stared at the plans spread across his mahogany desk. Plans he knew he had never drafted, yet bore his signature in the corner. Every line, every measurement, every detail spoke of buildings that stood tall in his mind's eye, structures that breathed with life he had never consciously given them. The strangest part was not that these blueprints existed, but that when he drove through the city later that evening, those very buildings rose from the earth exactly as drawn, exactly as he had somehow dreamed them into being. This is not a story about architecture. This is a story about you, about me, about every human being who has ever wondered why life seems to happen to them rather than through them. The architect discovered what every awakened soul eventually realizes. We are not the victims of tomorrow, we are its authors. But we write with a pen we have forgotten how to hold, in a language we have trained ourselves not to understand. The blueprint of your future already exists, not in some mystical realm beyond your reach, but in the workshop of your own imagination. Every experience you will ever have, every person you will meet, every circumstance that will shape your days ahead, sits waiting in a dimension that is closer to you than your own heartbeat. You visit this place every night when you sleep, every moment when you daydream, every instant when you lose yourself in the theater of your mind. But you have been taught to call these visits mere imagination, as if the faculty that creates worlds could ever be mere anything. The tragedy of human existence is not that we lack power, but that we have forgotten we possess it. We walk through life as sleepwalkers, reacting to a world we believe exists independent of our consciousness, never realizing we are the dreamers dreaming the dream. We build our days on the assumption that circumstances must change before our experiences can change, never understanding that our experiences change because our assumptions change. What if everything you have been taught about the nature of reality is backwards? What if instead of your consciousness being produced by your brain is actually receiving and translating the consciousness you are? What if instead of you being in the world is in you? What if tomorrow is not something that happens to you, but something that happens through you as you, because of the assumptions you hold about what tomorrow must contain? The architect's blueprints were not mysterious. They were inevitable. His imagination had been quietly, constantly creating his tomorrow, just as your imagination has been creating yours. The only difference between the architect and the average person is that he finally recognized his own handwriting on the plans of his life. When we speak of the fourth dimension, we are not venturing into the realm of science fiction or mathematical abstraction. We are entering the most practical space you will ever know, the dimension of consciousness itself. Not whether you have the power to create the life you desire, but whether you will claim that power. Not whether you are divine consciousness expressing itself in human form, but whether you will live from that truth. Tomorrow exists in your imagination right now, complete and perfect, waiting not for you to create it, but for you to recognize it, accept it, feel it as real, assume it as true. The blueprint is already drawn in the workshop of your consciousness. The architect has always been you. The signature in the corner has always been yours. The only choice you face is the choice every awakened soul must make. Will you continue to react to the world as if you are separate from its source, or will you begin to create from the world knowing you are its source? Will you keep hoping for change to come from outside yourself, or will you start assuming change from inside yourself? Will you remain asleep in the dream of limitation, or will you awaken to the truth of your unlimited nature? These words will end, but the truth they point to is eternal. Long after every book is forgotten, every teaching dissolved, every method abandoned, the fact will remain. You are consciousness itself, dreaming the dream of being human, creating your experience through the power of assumption, free to rewrite tomorrow by changing what you assume to be true today. The renaissance of human divinity is not a movement you join. It is a recognition you have. It is not a truth you learn. It is a truth you are. It is not a power you develop. It is a power you acknowledge as what you have always been. Tomorrow is not coming to you. Tomorrow is coming through you as you because of the assumptions you are holding about tomorrow right now. Enter fourth dimensional thinking, not as a technique to get what you want, but as recognition of what you are. Rewrite tomorrow not because you lack something to mouse, Ode, but because you have the power to create any today you choose to experience. The architect discovered his blueprints were not mysterious but inevitable. You will discover the same truth about the blueprint of your life. You are not the victim of tomorrow. You are its author. The pen is in your hand. The workshop is your imagination. The power is your assumption. The time is now. What will you choose to assume about yourself and your world? What will you choose to feel is true about your life? What will you choose to create from the fourth dimension of consciousness where all possibilities wait to be selected, accepted, and experienced? The choice is yours. It has always been yours. It will always be yours. This is not the burden of responsibility, but the joy of freedom. This is not the weight of creation, but the lightness of play. This is not the struggle of becoming, but the ease of being what you have always been. Divine consciousness expressing itself as you, creating the world through the power of its own imagination, free to assume any truth and live any reality it chooses to make real. Wake up, Divine One. The dream is yours to dream. Tomorrow is yours to write. Reality is yours to create. The fourth dimension is where you have always lived. Enter it consciously and rewrite tomorrow today. You live in 3 dimensions of space, move through 1 dimension of time, but you create from a dimension that transcends them all. This is the dimension where your assumptions live, where your beliefs take form, where your habitual thoughts become the blueprint of your experience. Most people live their entire lives imprisoned in 3-dimensional thinking. They see only what their physical senses report. They believe only what their circumstances confirm. They react to their environment as if it were the cause of their experience, never recognizing that their environment is actually the effect of their consciousness. They look at their bank account and say, I am poor. They look at their relationships and say, I am unlucky in love. They look at their health and say, I am sick. Each statement, each assumption, each acceptance of what appears to be becomes the very foundation upon which tomorrow builds itself. But there exists another way of thinking, another way of being, another way of creating your experience. Fourth dimensional thinking is thinking from the state of consciousness you wish to embody, rather than thinking about the state you wish to reach. It is assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not hoping the wish will someday be fulfilled. It is living from the end result, not struggling toward the end result. Your imagination is not the opposite of reality. Your imagination is the very fabric from which reality is woven. Every chair you sit in, every building you enter, every device you use, every story you read, first existed as an imaginal act in someone's consciousness. The difference between the things that exist only in imagination and the things that exist in what you call the physical world is simply this. The physical things are imaginal acts that have been persisted in, believed in, felt into being. When you think 3-dimensionally, you say, when I have money, then I will feel wealthy. When you think 4th-dimensionally, you say, I feel wealthy now and money must follow. When you think 3-dimensionally, you say, when I find love, then I will feel lovable. When you think 4th-dimensionally, you say, I feel lovable now and love must express itself in my experience. The 4th dimension is the dimension of causation. The 3 dimensions you see around you are merely dimensions of effect. This is why feeling is the secret. Not positive thinking, not visualization techniques, not affirmation spoken without conviction, but feeling. The feeling of the wish fulfilled, the feeling of being who you want to be, the feeling of having what you want to have, the feeling of living the life you want to live. This feeling, sustained and repeated, becomes an assumption. This assumption, lived from and not merely thought about, becomes your reality. Your consciousness is not in your head waiting to be convinced by evidence. Your consciousness is the space in which all evidence appears. You are not a being trying to become conscious of reality. You are consciousness itself, becoming aware of the reality you are creating moment by moment through the assumptions you accept as true about yourself and your world. The knowledge of 4th-dimensional thinking has never been lost, though it has often been hidden in plain sight. Throughout history, those who understood the creative power of consciousness have spoken in symbols, in parables, in mystical language that could be dismissed by the skeptical and embraced by the ready. They spoke of kingdoms of heaven within, of thoughts becoming things, of consciousness as the only reality, of imagination as the divine creative power. They were not speaking metaphorically. They were speaking literally about the most practical truth any human being can master. Ancient wisdom traditions across every culture have pointed to the same fundamental truth. Consciousness creates experience, not the other way around. The builders of the pyramids understood the power of assumption. The masters of the mystery schools taught their initiates to think from the desired state rather than about the desired state. The mystics and sages of every tradition have proclaimed that you become what you believe yourself to be, not what you hope to become someday. But this knowledge has also been systematically obscured, diluted, and misrepresented. Those who benefit from humanity living in reactive three-dimensional thinking have always worked to keep the masses ignorant of their creative power. It serves certain interests for people to believe they are victims of circumstances, dependent on external authorities for their well-being, convinced that change comes from the outside rather than from within. The conspiracy is not hidden. It is open for all to see. Every day, through every channel of information, you are told who you are supposed to be, what you are supposed to want, how you are supposed to. Oh, think about yourself and your possibilities. You are programmed to believe that you are separate from the source of your good, that you must struggle and compete and sacrifice to achieve your desires, that life is hard and resources are scarce and most dreams are unrealistic. But the same mystics and visionaries who understood consciousness as creative power also left us breadcrumbs, clues scattered throughout art and literature and sacred texts for those with eyes to see. They painted consciousness as light, imagination as divine creation, assumption as the law that governs all manifestation. They spoke of humans made in the image of the Creator, possessing the same creative faculties as the divine consciousness from which they emerged. The poets knew, the artists knew, the true scientists knew. Those who looked deeply into the nature of reality discovered that consciousness is not produced by matter, but that matter is produced by consciousness. They found that observation changes the observed, that expectation influences outcome, that belief shapes experience in ways that transcend what three-dimensional thinking can explain. This understanding has been emerging again in our time, clothed in the language of quantum physics, neuroscience, and psychology. The ancient truth that consciousness creates reality is being rediscovered by those who probe deeply enough into the nature of existence. The mystics and the scientists are beginning to speak the same language, recognizing that what the ancients called imagination and what modern researchers call the quantum field of possibilities are different names for the same creative principle. The fourth dimension is not somewhere you go. It is where you are. It is the space of pure potentiality from which all possibilities emerge into experience. It is the workshop where your assumptions about yourself and your world are transformed into the circumstances and events you encounter. It is the realm where feeling becomes fact, where imagination becomes reality, where the wish fulfilled in consciousness must express itself in form. You are already thinking fourth dimensionally, whether you realize it or not. The question is whether you are thinking fourth dimensionally on purpose, with awareness of what you are creating, or whether you are thinking fourth dimensionally by default, unconsciously assuming and therefore creating what you do not want. Every day, through every thought you think repetitively, every feeling you feel habitually, every assumption you accept without question, you are writing the blueprint of tomorrow. The architect in our story simply became conscious of what he had always been doing unconsciously. The most revolutionary discovery of our time is not happening in laboratories or universities, though it validates what mystics have always known. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what the awakened have proclaimed for millennia. Your brain cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a physically lived one. When you imagine with sufficient intensity and feeling, your neural pathways fire in identical patterns to those activated by actual experience. This is not metaphor. This is measurable, observable, scientific fact. Your brain is not the creator of your consciousness, but rather its most faithful servant. It responds instantly and completely to the assumptions you feed it through your imagination. When you repeatedly imagine yourself living from a desired state, feeling the reality of that state, accepting it as true, your brain begins to rewire itself to support that assumption. New neural pathways form. Old patterns of limitation dissolve. Your entire nervous system reorganizes itself around the truth you have chosen to embody in consciousness. This is why your mental diet matters more than any physical diet you could ever follow. Every thought you think repetitively, every scene you replay in your mind, every assumption you accept about yourself and your world becomes the nutritional foundation upon which your brain builds your tomorrow. Feed your consciousness images of lack, and your brain will create neural pathways that recognize and magnetize scarcity. Feed your consciousness images of abundance, and your brain will create neural pathways that recognize and magnetize prosperity. The reticular activating system, that small bundle of neurons at the base of your brainstem, serves as the gatekeeper between your conscious and unconscious mind. It determines which of the millions of bits of information bombarding your senses every second will be allowed into your conscious awareness. But here is the crucial understanding. Your reticular activating system does not operate independently. It serves your assumptions. It filters reality to match what you believe to be true about yourself and your world. When you assume you are unsuccessful, your reticular activating system diligently searches for and highlights every piece of evidence that confirms your assumption while filtering out evidence of your successes. When you assume you are beloved, it performs the opposite function, bringing into your awareness every indication of love while allowing signs of rejection to pass unnoticed. Your brain is not presenting you with objective reality. Your brain is presenting you with selective reality based on the assumptions you have accepted as true. This is the scientific foundation of what has been called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and rewire itself throughout your lifetime. But neuroplasticity is not random. It follows the patterns established by your habitual thoughts, your repeated imaginings, your consistent assumptions about what is possible for you. Every time you imagine a desired state with feeling, every time you assume the reality of your wish fulfilled, you are literally rewiring your brain to support that new reality. The implications are staggering. You are not the victim of your genetics, your past experiences, or your current circumstances. Your brain is constantly changing, constantly adapting, constantly restructuring itself according to the mental images you consistently entertain. This means that assumption truly is T. He, mother of all creation, not just metaphysically, but biologically, neurologically, physically. But most people use this incredible power in reverse. They observe their current circumstances and imagine them continuing. They remember their past failures and assume they predict future outcomes. They notice what is wrong in their world and give it the gift of their repeated attention, their emotional energy, their unconscious assumption that what is must continue to be. They are using their divine imagination to create more of what they do not want. This reversal of creative power is not accidental. It is the result of systematic conditioning that begins in childhood and continues throughout adult life. From the moment you first comprehend language, you are taught to believe that the physical world is the cause and your consciousness is the effect. You are trained to think that circumstances must change before your experience can change. You are programmed to accept the evidence of your senses as the ultimate truth about what is possible for you. The institutions that shape human thinking have a vested interest in maintaining this illusion. Educational systems teach you to memorize facts rather than question assumptions. Media systems bombard you with images of what you should fear, what you should want, who you should be. Economic systems convince you that your security depends on forces beyond your control. Political systems persuade you that your well-being depends on the decisions of others. Religious systems often teach you to look outside yourself for salvation, redemption, or divine intervention. Each of these systems, whether intentionally or not, reinforces the fundamental lie that you are separate from the source of your good, dependent on external conditions for your happiness, limited by circumstances beyond your influence. They teach you to think about your desires rather than from your desires fulfilled. They encourage you to hope for change rather than assume change. They program you to react to your world rather than create your world. This conditioning is so pervasive, so subtle, so woven into the fabric of ordinary thinking that most people never recognize it as conditioning at all. They accept their programmed limitations as natural law. They mistake their learned helplessness for wisdom. They confuse their conditioned reactions for authentic responses. They live their entire lives reacting to a world they have unconsciously agreed to see as separate from themselves. But every assumption you have been taught to accept can be consciously changed. Every limitation you have been programmed to believe can be consciously transcended. Every pattern of thinking that creates what you do not want can be consciously transformed into a pattern of thinking that creates what you do want. The same power that has been used to program limitation can be used to program limitlessness. This is where the practical alchemy begins. This is where fourth dimensional thinking moves from philosophy to practice, from understanding to application, from knowledge to transformation. The techniques are simple, but their simplicity should not deceive you into thinking they lack power. The most profound truths are always the simplest truths, and the most effective methods are always the most natural methods. The foundation of all transformation is learning to think from the state you wish to embody rather than about the state you wish to reach. This requires a complete reversal of ordinary thinking. Instead of looking at your current circumstances and trying to figure out how to change them, you must first assume the feeling of your circumstances already being changed. Instead of wondering if your desires are possible, you must assume they are inevitable. Instead of waiting for evidence before believing, you must believe before evidence appears. This assumption must be felt, not merely thought. Feeling is the secret. because feeling is the language your subconscious mind understands. Your subconscious does not respond to words, arguments, or logical reasoning. It responds only to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the emotional conviction that what you desire is already yours in consciousness and must therefore appear in form. The most powerful time to impress your subconscious with new assumptions is in the drowsy state between waking and sleeping, what can be called the state akin to sleep. In this relaxed, receptive condition, your conscious mind with its doubts and limitations becomes quiet, allowing you to feel your way into the reality of your wish fulfilled without resistance or contradiction. During this state, you do not visualize your desire as something you hope to achieve. You feel yourself already being, having, or experiencing what you desire. If you want abundance, you feel wealthy now. If you want love, you feel beloved now. If you want success, you feel successful now. You make these feelings so real, so vivid, so natural, that for those precious moments between waking and sleeping, they become your actual experience of yourself. This is not pretending. This is not positive thinking. This is not self-deception. This is entering the creative state of consciousness where all possibilities exist simultaneously, and choosing which possibility you will make real through the intensity of your feeling and the persistence of your assumption. You are not imagining what might happen someday. You are experiencing what is happening now in the dimension of consciousness from which all physical experiences emerge. The key is persistence. One night of feeling wealthy will not transform a lifetime of assuming poverty. One moment of feeling loved will not undo years of assuming rejection. The assumption must be repeated, sustained, lived from, until it becomes as natural as breathing, as automatic as your heartbeat, as inevitable as tomorrow's sunrise. This is where most people fail in their attempts to change their lives. They try the technique once or twice, notice that their circumstances have not immediately changed, and conclude that the method does not work. They do not understand that they are dealing with a law as precise and reliable as any physical law, but one that operates in the dimension of consciousness before manifesting in the dimension of form. Between the imaginal act and its manifestation in form, there is what might be called the interval. This is the space where faith operates, where loyalty to the unseen is tested, where your commitment to your new assumption is either strengthened or abandoned. During this interval, your old world may seem to persist, while your new world prepares to emerge. This is not evidence that your assumption has failed. This is evidence that your assumption is working, preparing the way for its own fulfillment. The length of this interval depends entirely on the intensity of your feeling and the naturalness of your assumption. The more real your desired state feels to you in consciousness, the more quickly it must appear in form. The more natural it becomes for you to think from your wish fulfilled rather than about your wish being fulfilled, the less resistance you will encounter between imagination and manifestation. This is the practical alchemy that transforms lead into gold, limitation into freedom, dreams into reality. You are not working with the physical world to create change. You are working with consciousness to create change, knowing that the physical world has no choice but to conform to the patterns established in consciousness. You are not trying to manipulate circumstances. You are assuming new states of being, knowing that circumstances must rearrange themselves to match your assumptions. You are standing at the threshold of the greatest renaissance in human history, not a renaissance of art or science or technology, though these will follow as natural consequences, but a renaissance of human consciousness itself. The recognition that you are not a human being seeking to become divine, but divine consciousness expressing itself as a human being. This awakening is not reserved for the select few, the spiritually gifted, or the mystically inclined. It is the birthright of every person who has ever lived, the inevitable destiny of every consciousness that has chosen to experience itself through human form. You are not learning something new. You are remembering something ancient, something that has always been true about your nature, something that could never be taken from you because it is what you are. The transformation beginning to sweep across human consciousness is not happening by accident. It is not a random evolutionary development or a coincidental spiritual awakening. It is the natural result of consciousness becoming aware of itself as consciousness, of the dreamer awakening within the dream while continuing to dream, of divine imagination recognizing itself as the source and substance of all experience. For too long, humanity has lived under the illusion of separation, separate from the divine, separate from each other, separate from the creative power that shapes experience. This illusion has served its purpose, allowing consciousness to explore what it means to feel limited, powerless, dependent on external forces for L being and meaning. But that exploration is coming to an end. the time of forgetting is giving way to the time of remembering. What you are remembering is not a belief system or a spiritual practice or a philosophical theory. What you are remembering is a fact about the nature of reality itself. Consciousness is the only reality. Imagination creates all experience, and you are that consciousness, that imagination, that creative power, dreaming itself into form through the assumptions you accept as true about yourself and your world. This remembering changes everything. When you know yourself as consciousness rather than as the content of consciousness, you stop being the victim of circumstances and become the author of experience. When you recognize imagination as divine creative power rather than idle fantasy, you stop hoping for change and start assuming change. When you understand assumption as the law that governs all manifestation, you stop reacting to your world and start creating your world. But this transformation is not merely personal. As individual consciousness awakens to its creative nature, collective consciousness must inevitably follow. The assumptions held by groups, nations, and humanity as a whole are beginning to shift from limitation to possibility, from scarcity to abundance, from fear to love. What appears as global awakening, social transformation, and planetary healing is actually consciousness recognizing itself everywhere it looks. The old world built on the assumption of separation is dissolving. The new world built on the assumption of unity is emerging. This is not prophecy or wishful thinking. This is the inevitable result of consciousness awakening to its own nature. As more individuals discover their power to create rather than merely react, the collective dream of humanity must shift to accommodate these new assumptions about what is possible. You are not witnessing this transformation from the outside. You are participating in it from the inside. Every time you choose to think from your desired state rather than about your desired state, every time you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled rather than hoping the wish will someday be fulfilled, every time you live from the end result rather than struggle toward the end result, you are contributing to the renaissance of human divinity. This is your true work in the world, not to convince others of what you have discovered, not to change the world through external action, not to fix what appears to be broken, but to embody the truth of your divine nature so completely, so naturally, so effortlessly that others cannot help but remember their own divine nature in your presence. The renaissance of human divinity is not a future event waiting to happen. It is a present reality waiting to be recognized. It is not something you must achieve or earn or become worthy of. It is something you must simply acknowledge as what you have always been, what you could never stop being, what you will always be, regardless of what you may temporarily believe about yourself. This acknowledgement is not a mental exercise or an intellectual understanding. It is a feeling, a knowing, a state of being that recognizes itself as the source of all states, the consciousness in which all experiences appear, the imagination from which all realities emerge. When this recognition becomes natural, effortless, as automatic as breathing, you have awakened to your true identity as divine consciousness expressing itself in human form. From this awakened state, creation is not work but play. Manifestation is not struggle but natural expression. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a joy to be experienced. You discover that you have never been separate from your good, never been lacking anything essential, never been powerless to create the experience you desire. You realize that every perceived limitation was actually an invitation to recognize your unlimited nature. Every apparent obstacle was actually an opportunity to demonstrate your creative power. Every seeming delay was actually perfect timing, preparing you for greater recognition of who you are. The question that remains is not whether you can rewrite tomorrow, but whether you will